Here's an essay I wrote in 2003. It was never published. Teaching serious chronic offenders. A fog bank over the Mississippi River begins to swallow the bottom of the red full moon as I drive west toward the Minnesota Correctional Facility at Red Wing. I have to drive into that fog. It clears once I cross the Eisenhower Bridge into the town of Red Wing, and the sunlight ricochets off the white stone bluffs. At the facility, a mile south of town, the sky is high and blue. On my way to work, I had smoked a small cigar. It's a daily ritual as I move through the liminal space between my rural home and this world. On the way home, I will smoke another. Once inside the administration building, built at the end of the 1800s as a replica of a castle on the Rhine River, I punch the electronic code at each of the two Sallyport doors and walk off to Walter McGinnis High School. It's a small single-story school which looks like it was dropped into the middle of a correctional facility. Every time I enter this institution, I enter a world where the rules are different than on the outs. I teach serious and chronic male juvenile offenders. Most have been convicted of an average of 5 felonies in their short lifetimes. A few years ago, a survey indicated that 98% of our boys, at one time or another, had been suspended or expelled from their local schools. In the 2000-2001 school year, 247,500 students attended high school in Minnesota. McGinnis High School averaged 155 boys that year. Approximately 2/3 come to us with special education IEPs, individual education plans. We have no choice but to teach the worst behaved and often least educated student whom other schools can push out their doors. We can't do that. And if they don't change their habits, we are their last stop before adult prison. Administrators assign our boys to particular cottages depending on their conviction and court-assigned needs. Because a cottage group attends all classes as a unit, one class may consist of smaller, chemically dependent boys, 14 to 16 years old, who have educational skills that vary in levels from kindergarten to post-high school. The next class may be older, meaner gangbangers who must live with boys from enemy gangs. That class may be followed by a group of whiny and needy sex offenders. Then another class arrives from the chemical dependency cottage. Then older sex offenders, and so on for 7 hours. During my first class, a new commit tries to establish his rank in this CD cottage group. It's obvious that he's far more intelligent than anyone else in the group, and he's loud, and he's trying to prove that he's street smart and unfazed by his incarceration. He poses as one who thrives with his authority issues. I was told that his mother is a college professor. Unless we can help him appropriately fit in, he will be a serious problem in this group, which includes a young man with fetal alcohol syndrome who reads at a second grade level, The new boy will become a negative leader by manipulating the weaker members, thereby provoking distrust and confrontations. Experience tells me that he will definitely lead this group. The teachers, his caseworker, and cottage staff will discuss his behavior at our next cottage committee meeting, and we will plot strategies to groom him toward positive leadership and compassionate mentoring for the other boys. In class, I have to immediately tell him that foul language is not acceptable in my room. He drops his eyes and looks for support from the others. He doesn't receive it. Then he apologizes. Because he does not argue, I know he will be malleable enough to guide toward that positive leadership role. He may backslide, as most fellows do. At least once he'll misbehave seriously enough and be sent to the Dayton Security Unit, a segregation unit used for solitary timeouts. Maybe he'll try to hide some homemade hooch to drink after lights out. Or maybe he'll get into a fight with a group member with whom he spends 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. Maybe yell abusive sexual comments toward a female staff member a few hours after his mother's weekend visit. Maybe he will make side comments and threats to one of the sex offenders who pass him in the hall. A sex offender who was raped for 5 years before the age of 7, who has rectal damage and walks funny, yet also has begun to molest boys. Maybe he will try to throw a punch at me. It's not likely he'll sit in my class and try to fondle another group member, for which I must be especially vigilant when the sex offenders are in my room. But I can never be sure. One of those CD fellows is back in class today after a trip to DSU for horse playing against another boy's hip and doing a clothed Mississippi leghound act, as one teacher calls it. For years, I was assigned to the sex offender cottage, where I learned the mental, physical, sexual, and institutional histories of all the boys in that cottage. Many boys in other cottages also have sexual issues, and their behaviors seldom surprise me. On my first day years ago, I'd been given a short tour of the school and immediately assigned to help the teacher in DSU. I had not yet attended the academy, where I would be given 3 weeks of training on the philosophy of Minnesota corrections. I would learn corrections policies and various verbal and physical security tactics. School policies would be learned later. On that first day, after my first hour, the DSU teacher and I were called to the day floor. 5 security officers held down an enraged 130-pound Native American boy. The teacher and I each had to restrain a leg so the boy could be placed in a special restraint chair. One of the officers quietly but authoritatively told the boy, "Relax and come back to us. Relax and come back to us." He repeated this over and over with patience and control. Despite the careful but firm restraint by the 7 of us, this skinny boy would not stop wrestling. It took everything I had to hold one leg. Eventually, he quieted enough so we could put him into the chair. Once seated and strapped, he relaxed a bit, but ranted about the African American boy who had taunted him about his race and skinny body. He had been eating his meal alone on the day floor. The other boy taunted him from a cell through the safety glass window on a locked metal door. The skinny native boy swiftly grabbed a pencil from the officer's desk and tried to stab the other boy through the glass. The pencil shattered, which further enraged him and escalated the other boy's taunting. I wondered, what have I gotten myself into? Since that day, every year or so, I have witnessed or been part of at least one such incident, and there were more I have not witnessed. Yet, in Minnesota, we are proud of the fact there are far fewer incidents here than in most other states. Once I began to teach in the school, I learned that normalcy never quite arrives. I work with some of our most damaged and volatile young men. Because of their extremely dysfunctional histories, they may never be able to live normal lives. We usually only hear about former students who make headlines in the news by murdering someone or by being murdered. Sometimes word filters down that so-and-so is doing time elsewhere. Such news breaks my heart, but I have to leave that heartache at the facility. I cannot bring the difficulties home. We never hear about those young men who turned a corner and live successful and quiet lives. I have heard that since 1998, the recidivism rate for our population has diminished from 68% to about 35%. But I do not want to ask for the factual proof. I want to believe that my colleagues and I are doing a better job, and that I am helpful to the boys and to the public, which entrusts us with its cast-offs.